G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to talk to you about tibialis posterior tendon dysfunction, or PTTD. And what I'd like to take you through in this video is I want to show you some specific things you can do to try and make that tibialis posterior tendon feel better. But like we always try and do on the channel, we want to pair this symptomatic treatment up with something that attempts to fix the root underlying cause of why that exact part of your body has become sore in the first place. And as a spoiler, yes, it can be closely linked with arch dysfunction, but that arch dysfunction also has to come from something else. So let's get into it. So for those unaware, your tibialis posterior muscle essentially sits on the inside of your lower leg, runs down behind the bump at the side of your ankle, and it anchors down into and underneath the inside of your foot. So naturally, any arch dysfunction you may have, where your arch may collapse or is a little bit flatter than it needs to be, can be one of the leading causes of why the tendon that crosses over that part of your body can become irritated, annoyed, and dysfunctional over time. And this is really important to appreciate, because if we are just treating the symptoms of how you feel, and we aren't addressing the broader leg dysfunction that may lead to arch dysfunction, then it's hard to recreate the optimal environment for that tibialis posterior tendon to function normally and feel better long term. And what I see a lot as a physio is that a lot of people tend to address these things with orthotics. And while this is a story for another video, the overarching idea that I think everyone needs to appreciate with something like arch supports or orthotics is that they are in and of themselves a symptomatic treatment. Orthotics will only help support your symptoms while you are wearing shoes. An arch support will be filling a gap that your body needs to be filled naturally. And that's what we hope to get to in this video. So we will get to a symptomatic treatment for your tib post dysfunction with a ball in a second. But before we get there, I want to give you some important context to help you better appreciate why we're going to do the things we're going to do. And it may help you understand what you may be missing in your rehab from tib post dysfunction. So in trying to resolve tibialis posterior tendon dysfunction, it's crucial that we understand some of the potential mechanisms that may have led to that exact part of your body becoming dysfunctional when it shouldn't. And clinically, what I find as a physio is that we need to take a look at how your broader leg is functioning to obtain the necessary context that helps us explain why that part of your leg has become sore. And if you are already aware of arch dysfunction's role in tib post dysfunction, then you are some way there already. But there is a broader context beyond arch dysfunction that we need to appreciate so that we can improve your arch dysfunction and how you load up that tendon over time. So the easiest way to observe what may be going on with you is to do this in standing and squatting. Typically what we see is that if you have an arch that wants to collapse, because we tend to be narrow focused, we often say that your arch problem is a foot problem. But in reality, because your foot is just one part of your lower leg, we need to think of this as a leg issue, not a foot issue. Because what can happen is if you stand with your feet straight and you have an arch that is more collapsed than you'd like it to be, if you turn your legs outwards without letting your big toe lift up, what you should notice is that your arches will lift more than they did previously. And what a lot of people's arch dysfunction is just your whole leg de-rotating for a number of reasons that we'll get to. And a consequence of that is the arch wants to collapse. And if we're just looking at your foot specifically and say, well, your arch has collapsed, want to jam an orthotic in there to hold it up, that arch support is basically trying to block your leg from collapsing from underneath. But when you take that away, the leg is still going to want to collapse regardless. So if we don't take a top-down approach and look at how you load up that arch in the context of your broader leg function, then again, we could be missing some of the main context that helps you explain why that exact part of your leg has become a problem. And some of the main reasons why a leg wants to de-rotate and collapse that arch is because your body is compensating or going around restrictions in your ankle joint or restrictions in your hip. And in the context of a squat, if you squat with your feet straight and you screw your knees out and really pull the arch up and activate your glute muscles, when you squat down, your knees should stay relatively far apart. But if you find that you run into some hidden ankle restriction or some hidden hip restriction, the path of least resistance for your leg is to cave your leg in to go around that restriction. And if you keep your feet straight, it will look like your knees cave in. But for a lot of people, one of the ways our body blows off some steam is to turn your feet out. Because if we're moving forwards, we're essentially still able to go around that restriction as opposed to through that restriction in a more mechanically optimal way. So the next thing we want to get to is we want to give you a symptomatic treatment to help your tib post tendon dysfunction before we move on to the broader context that maybe asked it to be there in the first place. So once we can hopefully appreciate the potential broader mechanism that may lead to one specific part of your foot becoming an issue, we obviously want to give you something to help make that feel better as soon as possible. A really simple thing that we can do is using a ball to go after any tight soft tissue that you may have accrued in that tib post muscle that may be contributing to that tendon dysfunction. You can do this sitting cross-legged on a chair. Obviously, it's much easier for a lot of people to do, but I like being down on the floor. So we want to have your heel and your foot off the edge of something. Taking that ball, finding your shin bone at the top. We want to come back from the bony aspect, and we want to go hunting down through here for anything at all that feels tight, tender, thicker, more restricted, and more dense. We don't have to be too specific as to whether we hit that tib post muscle tissue specifically, because if you do have some arch dysfunction, the entire inside of that shin is probably going to be loaded up awkwardly anyway. So we don't need to be too specific. We just want to go looking for anything that you feel is important. And for me, I can find a little bit of a sort of a tight, thick spot here. We've got some options. You can leave the ball here and do some basic trigger point therapy where you let the ball press in. This creates a reflex that prompts that tissue to give and relax somewhat instantly. We can find that same spot. We can pin it down with a little bit of gentle pressure, and then we can move your foot around to try and shear that tissue free from underneath the ball. We can pair all of that together with some constant pressure, some tensing and relaxing, some tensing and relaxing. And we can use a shearing technique to free up that tissue, and then systematically work your way around looking for anything that feels tight or restricted. After a very short amount of time, you should feel like it becomes less tender pretty quickly. So keep working up and down that shin, looking for anything that feels important to you. Obviously, the closer you get down towards your ankle, the more tight and tender it may be, because that is closer to that arch dysfunction and that tendon dysfunction. But we can work all the way down until we get sort of behind the ankle bone as well. Same deal, looking for anything that feels restricted, adding in some sort of dorsiflexion where you're pulling your foot backwards and trying to turn the sole of your foot away to sort of open up the inside of that shin area. And we just want to keep repeating this process until you feel like you've been able to capture a whole bunch of tightness that you may never have realized was there, because it's above exactly where that tendon feels sore for you. But as I mentioned, if we don't pair this up with an attempt to improve the way that you load up your leg, the arch, and that tib post tendon, then we are essentially just doing a symptomatic treatment that we may have to keep doing indefinitely until something else changes. And it's also worth noting that as a member of the channel, you'll get access to the extended cut of this video that goes beyond the mobility aspects and will target a little bit more of the strength aspects of trying to optimize the cause of why your tib post dysfunction is there in the first place. So if you want even more depth to this conversation, please consider becoming a member. It's just a few dollars a month. Greatly helps support me and the channel, but it'll hopefully help give you some more things to work on to ultimately solve this tib post dysfunction. So once you've fed some slack into that tib post dysfunction from above, and hopefully seen some improvements in how that area feels, we now want to take a step back and go after some of the hidden mechanical restrictions within your leg that may be asking that arch to collapse and for you to unknowingly load up that tendon poorly. And as I mentioned, one of the most hidden restrictions that people tend to have is an ankle joint restriction. The idea with this is, because we want to get you to move forward in a linear plane, if you run into some ankle range of motion restrictions, and your body will always take the path of least resistance, your body will either dump inwards to go around that, or it'll turn your foot out to essentially do the same thing. So we want to give you an exercise that targets any ankle joint restrictions specifically to see how meaningful it may be for you in your specific circumstances. Because if it is, then we can talk about why that may be there in the first place as well. But for me, one of the best ways that I've seen to mobilize an ankle joint that is restricted, again, not the soft tissue so much around the joint, but the deepest joint itself, the rustiness that tends to develop, is the banded ankle stretch. And it just requires you to tie a band to something sturdy, place it just below your ankle bones, and then stepping out as far as you feel comfortable, so you've got enough tension pulling the joint back. If you step through with your other foot, all we're looking to do here is to bend your back ankle as far as you feel comfortable, paying attention to not let your knee cave in. You will go further if you let your arch collapse, your leg rotate in and go in this direction. Instead, what we want you to do is keeping your foot where it is, try and rotate your entire leg out as far as you feel comfortable without your big toe coming up off the ground, and go through this sort of more outer range of your mobility. You can hold this position for 30 seconds to 2 minutes, or you can sort of oscillate in and out of that end range, making sure that you're not irritating anything on the inside of that ankle. Again, spend 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 2 minutes just trying to get that stiff, rusty joint to mobilize, so that once you've done that and you come out of that again, that you feel instantly a little bit lighter and a little bit more mobile than you did before. And as we showed you originally, when we do something like a little mini squat, you should feel like it's easier for you to keep your knees out in a more stable position and less awkward if your foot wants to turn out so that you can get further into that range. But ideally, we want you to feel a little bit more mobile through there and then see what impact it has on the symptoms that you're dealing with your tib post dysfunction. So once we've started to address some of the hidden mobility restrictions at the ankle, we do want to pair this up with some hip mobility exercises to make sure that we're taking care of anything that might be causing that leg to dump inwards from above. And there's two really simple exercises that you can do to feed some slack into a tight, stiff, rusty hip to improve how your leg functions as a whole. The first is a hip external rotation exercise, or a glute stretch. This is really important because this position where we're trying to plant your foot, rotate your knee outwards to pull your arch up from above, is essentially this position. So if you are restricted in this range, then it's harder for your leg to get out into the position that we want to pull your arch up from above. So you can do this sitting however you want to do. If you're up nice and tall, cross your leg if you can get it up there. Keeping your back nice and tall. From your hip, we want you to hinge forward as far as you feel comfortable, looking for some restriction through those glutes. You can gently twist towards your knee, twist away from your knee to find what gives you the best access to that. But as soon as you find whatever version of tightness feels the best for you, we don't just want to hold this position, we want to get active and tense your muscles up. Tense up those tight spots for 5 to 10 seconds. Again, this creates a reflex so that when you stop tensing, that tissue will physically give to some degree straight away, allowing you to go that little bit further into the stretch than you could before. And we want to keep repeating this process until you get sick of it or you stop making change. And again, what you should find is just after doing that, it should immediately feel easier to keep your leg out in that hip externally rotated position than it may have been beforehand. Again, making it easier for you to hold your arch up from above, improving the way that that tib post tendon is loaded from all the way at the top of that hip. And another great hip exercise to pair this up with is something like the couch stretch that goes after some hip restrictions at the front of the hip. The reason why this is important is if you are standing and walking and you do feel the front of your hip is tight, it's easy for your body to turn your leg outwards to get around that hip restriction, which again can leave you with your foot pointing outwards when you're walking forwards, perpetuating that internally rotated collapsed position. So as you may have seen a million times before, with the couch stretch, you just want to get your knee into the back corner of the chair, keeping your back straight, coming up as tall as you feel comfortable, looking for some real nasty tightness at the front of that hip, the front of that thigh. Same thing as before, squeeze your glutes, tense up your thigh muscles, hold that for 5 to 10 seconds. When you give, it'll give. You'll be able to get that little bit further back into the stretch. Keep repeating that process again until you feel looser or you stop making change. And then again, when you do that and then walk around, if you freed up the front and the back of that hip, you should feel like it's easier to walk with your feet straight. You should also feel like it's easier to squat with that really good hip external rotation, allowing that arch to be lifted up from above. And then once we've done some mobility exercises to try and improve how the entire leg functions, we do want to pair it up with some squatting-based movements to reinforce the pattern that really helps lift your arches up from above. So at the end of the day, we always need to pair up the things that make your tib post tendon dysfunction feel better with things that hopefully try and get to the root underlying cause of why that specific part of your foot has become a problem, especially if it's on one side more than another. Yes, things like orthotics and arch supports can be helpful, but we need to think of these as short-term symptomatic treatments and not a long-term fix. But the positive thing is, if supporting your arch helps alleviate some of your symptoms, then we just need to get your body to do that naturally so that when you take the support away, it doesn't just fall into a heap once again. Because again, remember, being barefoot is normal. We shouldn't have to wear shoes just to feel normal, but shoes may help us fill some gaps that are missing throughout the broader mechanics of our legs. For a lot of people, that is ankle mobility restrictions and certain hip restrictions that may go completely unnoticed until you go looking for them specifically. You may need some more strength in certain areas to help support the mechanism that we're trying to facilitate. Pay attention to how you stand and walk, and whether your feet are straight or they start to turn out, ultimately loading up the arch poorly and that tendon poorly as well. But we need to think of you as more than just a sore tendon if we are truly going to understand why it happened and what your body needs for that to never happen again. So at the end of the day, thank you for watching. Please consider leaving a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you want more of this content from me. Please share this video with someone that you care about if you know that they're dealing with tib post tendon dysfunction. Please consider becoming a member if you want the extended cut of this video where I go into more depth around some strength exercises for tib post tendon dysfunction. And if you'd like some specific one-on-one help with your own dysfunction, please consider booking in an online consultation with me. We can go through this in real time to figure out what the specific things that you need to do are so that you can finally conquer this long term. But as always, thank you again for watching. I hope that was helpful, and I'll talk to you soon.